The crack of the whip cut through the dawn silence as Prudence Foster guided her team of 6 horses along the rugged Arizona trail, her face set with determination that belied her 22 years. The stagecoach bounced and rattled behind her, filled with passengers who had initially balked at the sight of a woman holding the reins. It was 1879, and the Arizona Territory was no place for a lady driver, at least that's what everyone in Coolidge told her. "Hiya," Prudence called, snapping the reins with practiced ease. Her honey-blonde hair was tucked beneath a wide-brimmed hat, her skin sun-kissed from years under the relentless desert sun. The Butterfield Overland Mail Company hadn't wanted to hire her, not even after her father's death had left her with his skills and knowledge of every trail between Coolidge and Tucson. The morning sun climbed higher as Prudence navigated the rocky terrain. She wore men's trousers beneath her split skirt, another scandal the townsfolk whispered about. But practicality trumped propriety when one was perched atop a stagecoach, guiding a team through bandit country. "Miss Foster," called Mr. Hawkins, the Butterfield station manager, when Prudence pulled into the way station 4 hours later. His face was pinched with disapproval. "I've had 3 more complaints from passengers refusing to ride with a female driver." Prudence jumped down from the box, her boots raising dust as she landed. "Did we arrive safely, Mr. Hawkins?" "Well, yes, but on time. Yes, but then I don't see the problem." She brushed past him to begin checking her horses, her movements efficient and practiced. "The problem, Miss Foster, is that it simply isn't proper. Driving stagecoach is men's work. Your father would never have wanted. My father taught me everything he knew," Prudence cut in, her blue eyes flashing. "And he'd be proud to see me carrying on his legacy." Mr. Hawkins sighed, removing his spectacles to polish them on his vest. "Be that as it may, people are talking. They say it's unwomanly, unnatural even. A lady like yourself should be looking for a husband, making a home." Prudence had heard it all before. Unwomanly. As if womanliness were a virtue she should aspire to rather than a constraint designed to keep her from the life she loved. "Well, they can talk all they want while I'm making my runs," she replied, checking the harness of her lead horse. "Unless you're firing me," the threat hung in the air. They both knew Butterfield was short-handed, and few men were willing to drive the dangerous route between Coolidge and the mining towns to the south. "No, not yet," Hawkins admitted grudgingly. "But I've wired for a new driver from back east. When he arrives, we'll need to reconsider your position." Prudence said nothing, but her jaw tightened as she moved methodically through her tasks. She had 3 days before the eastbound stage would return her to Coolidge. 3 days to figure out how to keep the job that was her livelihood and her passion. The next morning, Prudence prepared for the journey back to Coolidge. The stagecoach was loaded with mail, packages, and 4 passengers, 2 miners returning from a lucrative stint in the silver mines, a traveling salesman, and a gentleman dressed in clothes too fine for the dusty trail. The latter approached her as she was checking the team. "Excuse me," he said, his voice carrying a hint of amusement. "I was told there must be some mistake, that the driver couldn't possibly be a woman." Prudence straightened, ready for yet another confrontation, and found herself looking into the warmest brown eyes she'd ever seen. The man was tall, with broad shoulders, and a strong jawline softened by a smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. His dark hair curled slightly beneath a well-worn Stetson, and unlike most men she encountered, he didn't look at her with derision. "No mistake," she said, her tone clipped from habit. "I'm Prudence Foster, your driver to Coolidge." He removed his hat and offered her a slight bow. "Thomas Prescott at your service, and may I say I'm delighted to have such a capable-looking driver." Prudence searched his face for mockery but found none. "Most men aren't. Most men are fools," he replied with a shrug. "My father always said to judge a person by their skill, not their sex." "Your father sounds like a wise man." He was. Thomas's smile dimmed momentarily. "He passed 2 years ago." "I'm sorry," Prudence said, feeling a sudden kinship with this stranger. "I lost my father last year," Thomas nodded, understanding in his eyes. "It's a hard thing to overcome." A call from the station interrupted their conversation. "All aboard," Hawkins shouted, eyeing Thomas and Prudence with suspicion. I should take my seat, Thomas said, replacing his hat. I look forward to our journey, Miss Foster. As he turned to go, Prudence found herself watching him longer than necessary. There was something about Thomas Prescott that intrigued her, though she quickly dismissed the thought. She had more pressing concerns than a handsome passenger. The journey began smoothly enough. Prudence handled the team with the skill born of years alongside her father, navigating the winding trail that cut through saguaro-dotted landscapes. The Arizona Territory unfolded before them in a tapestry of rust-red earth and distant purple mountains. Around midday, as they stopped to change horses at a remote station, Prudence overheard one of the miners complaining loudly. It ain't right, he grumbled to his companion. Women got no business handling horses like this. It's unwomanly, is what it is. She seems to know what she's doing, the other miner replied with a shrug. Don't matter, should be at home taking care of children. Next thing you know, they'll want to vote. Prudence kept her head high, ignoring the comments as she had learned to do. But as she climbed back onto the driver's box, she was surprised to find Thomas Prescott joining her. Mind if I ride up front? He asked, already settling beside her. The view is better. Suit yourself, she replied, though passengers rarely chose to sit with the driver, especially on the dusty, sun-exposed perch. As they set off again, Prudence couldn't help but notice how at ease Thomas seemed, as if he'd spent plenty of time on a stagecoach. You've done this before, she remarked, skillfully guiding the team around a sharp bend. Been riding stages since I was a boy, he confirmed. My father was in the freight business. We moved everything from mail to mining equipment across 3 territories. And what do you do, Mr. Prescott? Prudence asked, curious despite herself. Please call me Thomas, or Tom if you prefer. He watched the horizon as he spoke. I'm a cattle man now, got a spread about 20 miles north of Coolidge, just returning from Tucson where I was securing some contracts with the military. Prudence nodded, impressed despite herself. That's good business. It is, though I admit I miss the open road sometimes, the freedom of it. He turned to her with that warm smile that seemed to reach his eyes. I imagine that's part of why you do this. She felt herself relax slightly. It is. I love being out here, the land, the sky. She gestured to the vast expanse before them. It's different every day. I understand completely, Thomas agreed. Though I imagine it comes with its challenges for you, beyond the usual hazards of the road. Prudence shot him a sidelong glance. You mean because I'm a woman, people can be stubborn about their notions of what's proper? That's one way of putting it, she said dryly. They called me unwomanly when I first took the reins after my father died, said it wasn't decent, wasn't natural. The stage company only hired me because they were desperate and I knew the routes. Thomas was quiet for a moment. What do you think your father would say about you driving? The question caught her off guard. No one had ever asked that before. They all assumed Edward Foster would be rolling in his grave. He'd be proud, she said softly, certainty in her voice. He taught me everything: how to handle the team, how to spot trouble before it found us, how to deliver passengers and cargo safely no matter what. He didn't have a son to pass his knowledge to, but he had me, and he never once made me feel like that wasn't enough. Thomas nodded, his eyes on the landscape. He sounds like he was a good man. The best, Prudence agreed, a lump forming in her throat. They fell into companionable silence, the rhythmic sound of hooves and the creaking of the coach creating a backdrop to their thoughts. As the afternoon wore on, Prudence found herself stealing glances at her passenger. There was something compelling about Thomas Prescott, something beyond his obvious good looks. He had an ease about him, a confidence that didn't need to assert itself over others. The stagecoach route took them through increasingly rugged terrain as they approached a narrow pass known locally as Devil's Backbone. It was a notorious spot, the tight canyon creating a natural bottleneck that road agents sometimes exploited. We're coming up on Devil's Backbone, Prudence said, breaking the silence. Keep your eyes open, this stretch can be trouble. Thomas nodded, his posture subtly shifting as he scanned the rocky outcroppings above them. Want me to check my pistol? Wouldn't hurt, Prudence agreed. noting with approval that he'd already moved his coat aside for easier access to his sidearm. The pass loomed before them, the trail narrowing as it wound between towering rock walls. Prudence slowed the team, her senses heightened. Something felt off, though she couldn't say exactly what. They were halfway through the pass when the shot rang out. Prudence reacted instantly, snapping the reins and urging the team to speed up just as three masked men emerged from behind boulders, guns drawn. "Whoa there." One shouted, aiming directly at Prudence. Beside her, Thomas had drawn his pistol, but they were outgunned and outmaneuvered. The stagecoach skidded to a halt, the horses snorting and stamping nervously. "Hands where we can see them," called the apparent leader of the bandits, a tall man with a red bandana covering the lower half of his face. Prudence and Thomas slowly raised their hands. "Well, well," the leader said, approaching the coach. "What do we have here, a woman driver? Now I've seen everything." The other bandits laughed, circling the stagecoach as the passengers inside shouted in alarm. "Everyone out," barked the second bandit, yanking open the coach door. "Valuables in the bag, and don't try anything heroic." The passengers filed out, the miners grumbling, the salesman trembling. The red bandana bandit kept his gun trained on Prudence and Thomas. "You too, pretty lady," he said with a sneer in his voice. "Come on down from there." Prudence climbed down slowly, her mind racing. She'd been held up once before with her father years ago. They'd survived by staying calm and following orders. "Your money or your life," the bandit said, extending a dirty burlap sack toward her. "Though in your case I might take both." Thomas stepped between them. "She's just doing her job," he said evenly. "No need for threats." The bandit laughed. "Looks like the lady's got herself a protector. How sweet." He shoved Thomas back. "Empty your pockets, rich man. I know fine clothes when I see them." Thomas complied, dropping his wallet into the bag. The other passengers did the same, adding watches and rings to the collection. "Now the strong box," the leader demanded, gesturing to the coach. "I don't have the key," Prudence said truthfully. "Only the station managers can open it." The bandit sighed theatrically. "That's disappointing. Boys, get the tools." One of the other men approached with an axe, clearly intending to break open the strongbox containing the mail and any valuables being transported. What happened next occurred so quickly that Prudence would later struggle to piece it together. Thomas moved suddenly, knocking the gun from the leader's hand. In the same moment, the sound of galloping horses filled the canyon, and three riders appeared at the far end of the pass. "Marshal," one of the miners shouted, recognizing the lead rider. The bandits panicked. The one with the axe swung wildly at Thomas, who dodged the blow but lost his balance on the rocky ground. Prudence saw the third bandit aim his pistol at Thomas's fallen form and acted without thinking. She launched herself forward, knocking into the bandit's arm just as he fired. The shot went wild, and in the ensuing chaos the bandits scrambled for their horses, abandoning their loot in favor of escape. The marshal and his deputies thundered past the stagecoach in pursuit while Prudence knelt beside Thomas. "Are you hurt?" she asked breathlessly. Thomas sat up, dusty but uninjured. "Thanks to you, no." He looked at her with newfound respect. "That was either very brave or very foolish." "Probably both," she admitted, helping him to his feet. The danger had passed as quickly as it had arrived. The marshal returned shortly after, having captured two of the three bandits. The passengers, shaken but relieved, reboarded the coach. Before climbing back to her perch, Prudence checked each horse carefully, ensuring they hadn't been injured in the commotion. "Your driver saved my life," she overheard Thomas telling the marshal. "If not for Miss Foster's quick thinking, that bandit would have shot me for certain." The marshal, a grizzled man named Jenkins, looked skeptically at Prudence. "That true, miss?" Prudence shrugged, uncomfortable with the attention. "Anyone would have done the same." "Not anyone," Thomas insisted. "It takes courage to act when bullets are flying." The rest of the journey passed without incident, but something had shifted between Prudence and Thomas. A bond had formed in those tense moments in the pass, a mutual respect that transcended conventional boundaries. As they approached the outskirts of Coolidge, the familiar landscape bringing a sense of homecoming, Thomas turned to Prudence. Miss Foster, he said, his voice low enough that only she could hear, I'd like to call on you if you'd permit it. Prudence glanced at him in surprise. Call on me, Mr. Prescott, please, it's Thomas. His eyes were earnest. You're the most remarkable woman I've ever met. I'd like to know you better, away from bandits and stagecoaches. Prudence felt a flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with the rigors of the road. People would talk, she warned. They already think I'm unwomanly enough without receiving gentlemen callers. Thomas's smile was undimmed. Let them talk, I've never much cared for other people's opinions. He leaned closer, his voice dropping even lower. Drive me anywhere you want, Prudence Foster, I'd follow you to the ends of the earth. The sincerity in his words caught her off guard, and for once, Prudence found herself speechless. Before she could formulate a response, they were pulling into Coolidge, the stagecoach station coming into view. Think about it, Thomas said, straightening as they approached the station. I'll wait for your answer. The arrival in Coolidge brought the usual flurry of activity, passengers disembarking, luggage being unloaded, the station manager checking his pocket watch and making notes. Prudence went through her routine, helping to unhitch the team and settle them in the stable. She was brushing down the lead horse when she sensed someone behind her. Turning, she found Mr. Hawkins, the Coolidge station manager, looking more sour than usual. Miss Foster, he began, I've had a telegram from the main office. The new driver arrives next week. Prudence's heart sank, though she kept her expression neutral. I see. It means your services will no longer be required, Hawkins continued, almost apologetic. You'll be paid through the end of the month, of course. Prudence nodded stiffly. Thank you for the notice. Hawkins hesitated, then added, For what it's worth, you're a fine driver, Miss Foster. It's just not suitable work for a lady. He left her alone in the stable, the familiar smells of hay and horse offering little comfort. Prudence leaned against the stall door, the reality of her situation sinking in. Without this job, she had few options. She could try to find work as a housekeeper or seamstress, but those occupations felt like cages after the freedom of the open road. Lost in her thoughts, she didn't hear the footsteps approaching until Thomas Prescott was standing before her. I heard, he said simply. Prudence straightened, pride making her voice sharper than intended. Were you eavesdropping, Mr. Prescott? Not intentionally. He removed his hat, turning it in his hands. I came to see if you'd decided about my calling on you and overheard Hawkins. Well, now you know, they're replacing me with a proper male driver. She couldn't keep the bitterness from her voice. As everyone keeps reminding me, stagecoach driving is unwomanly work. Thomas was quiet for a moment. What will you do? I don't know, she admitted. Find other work, I suppose, though I can't imagine anything that would bring me the same satisfaction. What if? Thomas began, then paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. What if there was another option? Prudence raised an eyebrow. What kind of option? I mentioned I have a ranch north of town. It's a good piece of land with a creek running through it and grazing for 500 head of cattle. He spoke carefully, as if each word was important. What I didn't mention is that I've recently secured a contract to supply beef to the cavalry posts throughout the territory. Congratulations, Prudence said, unsure where this was leading. The thing is, Thomas continued, I need someone to handle the deliveries. Someone who knows the routes, who can manage a team and isn't afraid of the rigors of the road. Realization dawned on Prudence. You're offering me a job, Thomas nodded. The pay would be better than what Butterfield gives you, and you'd still be driving, just wagons instead of stagecoaches. Why would you do this? Prudence asked, suspicious of such unexpected good fortune. Because you're the best driver I've seen, man or woman, Thomas said simply. And because I believe people should be judged by their abilities, not their sex. Prudence studied him, searching for any sign of deception. And this has nothing to do with your wanting to call on me, Thomas had the grace to look slightly abashed. I won't lie and say I'm not attracted to you, Prudence. But the job offer stands regardless of your answer to my personal question. I don't believe in mixing business with other matters. The proposition was tempting more than tempting. It would allow her to keep the freedom she loved, to still feel the wind in her hair and the reins in her hands. I'd need to think about it, she said finally, Of course, Thomas agreed. Take your time, I'll be in town for a few days yet. He replaced his hat and gave her a slight bow. Good evening, Miss Foster. As he walked away, Prudence found herself watching his retreating form, conflicted emotions swirling within her. On one hand, Thomas Prescott's offer seemed almost too good to be true, a chance to continue the work she loved without the prejudice she faced at Butterfield. On the other hand, accepting felt dangerously like putting herself in a position of obligation to a man she barely knew, no matter how honorable his intentions seemed. That evening, Prudence returned to the small house she had shared with her father. It sat on the outskirts of Coolidge, a modest dwelling that nevertheless felt cavernous without her father's booming laugh and constant stories. She lit the lamps and prepared a simple meal, her mind still turning over Thomas's proposition. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Opening it, she found Mrs. Holloway, her nearest neighbor, a widow who had been kind to Prudence after her father's passing. "Evening, Prudence," Mrs. Holloway said, holding out a covered dish. "I made too much stew and thought you might enjoy some." "That's very kind, thank you," Prudence replied, accepting the offering and inviting the older woman inside. Mrs. Holloway settled at the kitchen table, her sharp eyes missing nothing as Prudence set out plates. "I heard about the stage company," she said without preamble. "Bringing in some man from back east to take your route. News traveled fast in small towns." "Word gets around, I see." "It's not right," Mrs. Holloway declared. "You're twice the driver your father was, God rest his soul, and he was the best I'd seen until you took the reins." The unexpected support warmed Prudence. "Thank you for saying so. Not many share your view. Pa, most people in this town wouldn't know good sense if it bit them on the nose." Mrs. Holloway helped herself to stew. "So what will you do now?" Prudence hesitated, then decided to confide in the older woman. "I've had an offer, actually, from Thomas Prescott." Mrs. Holloway's eyebrows shot up. "The rancher, the one with the spread up at Willow Creek, you know him?" "Know of him. His reputation is solid. Came out here about 3 years ago, built that ranch from nothing. Treats his men fairly, pays on time." She studied Prudence. "What sort of offer?" Prudence explained about the cavalry contract and the need for a driver. Mrs. Holloway listened attentively, nodding occasionally. "Sounds like a good opportunity," she said when Prudence finished. "Though I imagine tongues will wag if you're working for a bachelor like Prescott. They already wag about me driving stage," Prudence pointed out. "True enough." Mrs. Holloway took a bite of stew, chewed thoughtfully. "You like him, don't you, and not just as a potential employer?" The directness of the question brought heat to Prudence's cheeks. "I hardly know him." "But what you do know you like," Mrs. Holloway pressed, a knowing smile playing at her lips. Prudence couldn't deny it. There was something about Thomas Prescott that drew her in his easy confidence, his respect for her abilities, the way he looked at her as if truly seeing her. "It doesn't matter," she said finally. "I need to make decisions based on practical considerations, not whatever this feeling is, Mrs." Holloway reached across the table to pat Prudence's hand. "Sometimes, my dear, the heart knows what it wants before the head has time to catch up. Just promise me you'll consider your own happiness alongside those practical considerations." After Mrs. Holloway left, Prudence sat alone in her kitchen, her thoughts more tumultuous than ever. The prospect of working for Thomas Prescott offered a solution to her immediate problem, but it also opened the door to complications she wasn't sure she was ready to face. Yet when she imagined never seeing him again, never experiencing that warmth in his eyes or the understanding in his smile, she felt a hollowness that told its own story. The next morning, Prudence rose early and headed to the Butterfield station for her final week of work. She found Thomas waiting for her, leaning against a hitching post with the casual ease of a man accustomed to early hours. "Miss Foster," he greeted her, straightening as she approached. "Mr. Prescott," she replied, noting that he looked as handsome in the morning light as he had the day before. "What brings you here so early?" "I thought perhaps you might allow me to accompany you on your run today," he said. "To discuss the details of my proposition further." Prudence hesitated. Having Thomas beside her for another journey was tempting, but also potentially distracting. "It's the Tucson run," she warned. "We won't be back until tomorrow." "I'm aware of the schedule," he said with a smile. "I've made arrangements to stay overnight." Prudence considered the impropriety of traveling alone with Thomas, but given that she'd be driving a public stagecoach filled with other passengers, propriety seemed a minor concern. "Very well," she agreed, "but you'll need to purchase a ticket like any other passenger." Thomas produced one from his pocket, already taken care of. The day's journey proved less eventful than their previous one, with no bandits to interrupt their conversation. As the stagecoach rolled southward, Thomas outlined his business needs in more detail: the frequency of deliveries, the routes to various military outposts, the types of wagons she would be handling. "The work would be varied," he explained. "Sometimes you'd be delivering cattle on the hoof, other times sides of beef or supplies for the ranch. The army posts are scattered throughout the territory, so you'd still have plenty of open road." "It sounds interesting," Prudence admitted. The more Thomas described it, the more appealing the position became. "You'd have your own cabin on the ranch," he continued. "Nothing fancy, but private and comfortable, and Sundays would be yours to do as you please." Prudence glanced at him. "You've thought this through quite thoroughly." Thomas shrugged. "I like to be prepared, and I believe the arrangement could benefit us both." The "us" lingered between them, carrying implications beyond mere employment. By the time they reached Tucson, Prudence found herself genuinely interested in Thomas's offer. Over dinner at the hotel where the stagecoach passengers stayed overnight, they continued their discussion, moving from business to more personal matters. "Tell me about your father," Thomas said as they finished their meal. "You mentioned he taught you everything about driving." Prudence's expression softened at the memory. "Papa was larger than life. He came west after the war, started driving stage when the lines first pushed into Arizona territory. He loved the freedom of it, the challenge." She smiled at a memory. "He used to say that out here a person could reinvent themselves, become whoever they wanted to be." "Wise man," Thomas commented. "He was. When Mama died of fever when I was 12, it was just the two of us. Instead of sending me back east to relatives or finding me a stepmother, he simply brought me along on his routes." Prudence's eyes grew distant. "At first, I just rode inside with the passengers, but I was curious about everything. One day, when I was about 14, he put me up on the box beside him and showed me how to hold the reins. And you took to it naturally. Like I was born to it," he said. Pride colored her voice. "By the time I was 16, he would let me drive sections of the route while he rested. By 18, I could handle the team as well as he could." "What happened to him?" Thomas asked gently. Prudence's expression clouded. "Heart gave out right on the trail. One minute he was telling me about the time he outran a band of Apaches, the next." She swallowed hard. "I had to drive the rest of the way to Coolidge with him wrapped in a blanket beside me." Thomas reached across the table, his hand covering hers. "I'm sorry, that must have been unbearable." The warmth of his touch was comforting, and Prudence didn't pull away. "It was the hardest thing I've ever done, but I knew he would have wanted me to get the passengers home safe." "And the company hired you afterward?" Prudence nodded. "Not willingly, but there was no one else available who knew the routes as well, and I'd already proven I could handle the job. They thought it would be temporary, a few weeks, until they found a proper replacement." A hint of satisfaction crept into her voice. "It's been 14 months, Thomas smiled. "Impressive, you changed their minds through sheer competence." "Not all of them," Prudence reminded him. "They're still replacing me with that driver from back east." "Their loss," Thomas said firmly, "and hopefully my gain." The conversation turned to Thomas's background, how he'd come west after his father's death, determined to build something of his own. He spoke of his ranch with obvious pride and affection, describing the land and the small crew of men who worked for him. "It sounds beautiful," Prudence said, trying to envision the place he described. "It is," Thomas agreed, "though it could use a woman's touch. The cabin I mentioned for you is furnished, but basic. You'd be welcome to make it more homelike." Prudence caught the hint of something in his tone, hope, perhaps, or a question unasked. Before she could pursue it, their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of several other passengers, and the moment was lost. The return journey to Coolidge the next day cemented Prudence's decision. By the time they pulled into the station, she had made up her mind. "I accept your offer, Mr. Prescott," she told Thomas as they walked from the Stagecoach station. "On a trial basis, at least, 3 months to see if the arrangement suits us both." Thomas's face lit up with genuine pleasure. "I'm delighted to hear it. And please, if we're to work together, you must call me Thomas." "Thomas, then," Prudence agreed, finding she liked the sound of his name on her lips. "When can you start?" he asked eagerly. "I have a delivery scheduled for Fort Huachuca next week." "I'm contracted to Butterfield until Friday," Prudence said. "I could begin Monday after that." "Perfect. I'll send a wagon for your belongings on Sunday." Thomas hesitated, then added, "Would you allow me to escort you to dinner on Saturday to celebrate our new arrangement?" Prudence hesitated only briefly. "I'd like that." The week passed in a blur of final runs for Butterfield and preparations for her move. Prudence packed her modest belongings, said goodbye to Mrs. Holloway, and endured the curious and sometimes disapproving looks from townsfolk who had heard she was taking a position at the Prescott Ranch. Saturday evening arrived, and with it Thomas, dressed in his best suit and looking so handsome that Prudence felt suddenly self-conscious in her own carefully chosen blue dress. "You look beautiful," he said simply when she opened the door. Dinner was at the Coolidge Hotel, the finest establishment in town. As Thomas led her to a corner table, Prudence was acutely aware of the stares and whispers from other diners. Her reputation as the unwomanly stagecoach driver preceded her, and being seen in the company of one of the area's most eligible bachelors only added fuel to the gossip fire. "People are talking," she murmured as they were seated. Thomas glanced around the room, unconcerned. "Let them. I'm having dinner with the most interesting woman in Arizona territory. Their opinions don't change that fact." His confidence was infectious, and Prudence found herself relaxing as the evening progressed. Thomas was an attentive companion, drawing her out on subjects she cared about and listening with genuine interest to her responses. By the time dessert arrived, Prudence had nearly forgotten about the curious onlookers. "I have something for you," Thomas said as they finished their meal. He reached into his jacket and produced a small package wrapped in brown paper. Surprised, Prudence accepted it. "What's this?" "A welcome gift. Open it." Inside was a beautifully crafted leather pouch designed to attach to a belt. The leather was supple and dark with her initials PF stamped into it. "It's for carrying small items while you're driving," Thomas explained. "I noticed you struggling with your pockets on the journey." The thoughtfulness of the gift touched her more than an expensive trinket might have. "It's perfect, thank you." Thomas smiled, clearly pleased by her reaction. "I'm looking forward to having you at Willow Creek, Prudence. I think you'll find it suits you." As he walked her home under a canopy of stars, Prudence found herself wondering if it was the ranch or the rancher that might suit her. Either way, come Monday, her life would take a new direction. And for the first time since her father's death, the future looked bright with promise. Sunday brought the wagon Thomas had promised, driven by a weathered cowhand named Charlie who treated Prudence with gruff respect. Her few possessions were loaded quickly, and by midday, she was saying a final goodbye to the house she had shared with her father. "He'd be happy to see you moving forward," Mrs. Holloway assured her, pressing a jar of preserves into her hands as a parting gift. "Just be careful with that heart of yours." Prudence promised she would, though she wasn't entirely sure what she was promising to be careful about. The feelings Thomas Prescott stirred in her were new territory, as unfamiliar as the ranch toward which she was now heading. The journey to Willow Creek Ranch took just over 2 hours, the wagon following a well-maintained trail that wound northward from Coolidge. As they crested a final hill, Prudence got her first view of what would be her new home. The ranch sprawled across a verdant valley, a creek glinting silver in the afternoon sun. The main house was substantial but not ostentatious, built of stone and timber with a wide veranda. Several outbuildings dotted the property, along with corrals containing horses and cattle. In the distance, Prudence could see grazing herds dotting the hillsides. "There she is," Charlie said with evident pride. "Finest ranch in the territory, if you ask me." Thomas was waiting for them in the yard, and as Prudence descended from the wagon, she was struck again by the warmth of his smile and the genuine pleasure in his eyes at seeing her. "Welcome to Willow Creek," he said, offering his hand to help her down. The next few hours were a whirlwind of introductions and orientation. Prudence met the ranch hands a dozen men of various ages who worked the cattle, and Mrs. Garvey, the matronly woman who cooked for the ranch and kept house for Thomas. Her cabin, as promised, was small but comfortable, situated near the main house but with enough distance to afford privacy. "It's not much," Thomas said as he showed her the interior, "but I hope you'll be comfortable here." "It's lovely," Prudence assured him, taking in the simple furnishings: a bed, a table and chairs, a small stove, and a bookshelf already stocked with several volumes. Someone had placed wildflowers in a jar on the table, a welcoming touch that made her throat tighten unexpectedly. "Mrs. Garvey will expect you for supper in the main house at 6, Thomas said, backing toward the door to give her space. "Until then, make yourself at home. Rest, explore whatever you wish." Left alone, Prudence unpacked her belongings, arranging them in the small chest of drawers and hanging her few dresses in the wardrobe. When everything was in its place, she stepped outside, drawn by curiosity to explore her new surroundings. The ranch was even more impressive up close than it had been from a distance. Everything spoke of careful planning and diligent maintenance. The barns were well built, the corrals sturdy, the equipment in good repair. Everywhere she looked, Prudence saw evidence of Thomas's attention to detail. She was examining a wagon in one of the barns, presumably one she would soon be driving, when a voice behind her made her start. "She's a good one. New last year, built special for the Army contracts." Turning, Prudence found Thomas watching her, a soft expression on his face. "She looks solid," Prudence agreed, running a hand over the well-crafted wooden side panel. "Good workmanship." "I believe in investing in quality," Thomas said, stepping closer. "Tools, animals, people the best always prove their worth." The way he looked at her as he said it made Prudence wonder if she was included in that assessment. Supper that evening was a revelation. Mrs. Garvey's cooking far surpassed anything Prudence had managed for herself since her father's death, and the atmosphere in Thomas's dining room was unexpectedly warm and informal. Several of the senior ranch hands joined them at the large table, and conversation flowed easily, with no one commenting on the unusual circumstance of a woman being hired as a driver. "Charlie tells me you were a stagecoach driver before coming here, Mrs. Garvey said as she served apple pie for dessert. "That must have been exciting." "It was," Prudence confirmed. "Though sometimes too exciting. We were held up by bandits just last week." This revelation prompted a flood of questions, and Prudence found herself recounting the experience to an appreciative audience. She noticed that Thomas let her tell the story without interruption, only occasionally nodding in confirmation when someone looked his way. "Well, we're glad to have you here now," Mrs. Garvey declared when Prudence finished her tale. "Though I hope your journeys for Mr. Prescott will be less eventful." "Speaking of journeys," Thomas said, "we should discuss tomorrow's delivery to Fort Huachuca, Prudence." After the others had excused themselves, Thomas showed Prudence to his study, where a map was spread across a large desk. He traced the route she would take, pointing out landmarks and potential hazards along the way. "It's about a day's journey each way," he explained. "You'll be delivering correspondence and supplies this time, nothing too heavy. The fort commander is expecting you by sundown tomorrow." Prudence studied the map, committing the route to memory. "Seems straightforward enough." "It is, though there's a section here." Thomas indicated a stretch of the trail where the road narrows through a canyon. "Be alert there, we've had reports of bandits in that area." "I'm no stranger to bandits," Prudence reminded him with a slight smile, "so I've seen firsthand." Thomas's expression grew serious. "Still, I'd feel better if you had protection. There's a rifle in a scabbard on the wagon, and I'd like you to carry this as well." He opened a drawer and removed a revolver, offering it to her. Prudence accepted the weapon, checking it with the practiced ease of someone familiar with firearms. "Papa insisted I learn to shoot," she explained, seeing Thomas's raised eyebrow. "Said a woman alone needed to know how to defend herself. Your father was a wise man." Thomas watched her handle the gun with approval. "I've loaded the wagon with everything you'll need for the journey, including provisions for an overnight stay at the fort." As Prudence turned to leave, Thomas suddenly asked, "Are you nervous? About tomorrow?" She considered the question honestly. "A little," she admitted, "but not about the driving or the route, more about measuring up to your expectations." Thomas's expression softened. "You already have, Prudence. I wouldn't have hired you if I didn't believe in your abilities." His confidence in her was both reassuring and slightly unnerving. Prudence wasn't accustomed to having someone believe in her so completely, not since her father. "Thank you for the opportunity," she said simply. "I won't let you down. I know you won't." There was something in his voice, a warmth that went beyond employer to employee, that followed Prudence back to her cabin and into her dreams that night. Morning came early at Willow Creek Ranch. Prudence rose with the sun, dressed in her practical driving clothes trousers beneath a split skirt, a sturdy shirt, and her wide-brimmed hat, and made her way to the kitchen. Mrs. Garvey was already there, preparing breakfast for the ranch hands. "Good morning, Miss Foster," the older woman greeted her. "I've packed a lunch for your journey, and there's coffee and biscuits ready now if you'd like." Prudence thanked her, grateful for the thoughtfulness, and took her breakfast outside to eat by the wagon she would be driving. Thomas found her there, checking the harness on the team of 4 horses that would pull her cargo. "I see you're an early riser," he commented, accepting a cup of coffee from a passing ranch hand. "Always have been," Prudence replied, adjusting a strap. "Papa said the dawn belongs to those with places to go." Thomas smiled at that. "These horses are our best team," he told her. "Steady and strong, they'll serve you well." Prudence ran a hand over the lead horse's neck, feeling the powerful muscles beneath her palm. "They're beautiful animals." "I thought you'd appreciate them." There was a touch of pride in Thomas's voice. "Most of our stock I've bred myself over the past few years." The wagon was loaded and ready, the team harnessed, and the sun was barely above the horizon when Prudence prepared to depart. Thomas walked with her to the front of the wagon, his expression a mixture of pride and concern. "Be careful out there," he said, handing her up to the driver's seat. "Always am," Prudence assured him, settling the reins in her hands. Thomas seemed reluctant to step back. "I'll expect you back tomorrow evening," he said. "If you're delayed for any reason, I'll send word," Prudence promised. "Thomas, I've been doing this kind of work for years. I'll be fine," he nodded, finally stepping away. "Safe journey, Prudence." As she snapped the reins and the wagon began rolling out of the yard, Prudence glanced back to see Thomas watching her go, his tall figure silhouetted against the rising sun. Something about his stance, protective yet respectful, concerned yet confident, stirred emotions she wasn't ready to name. The journey to Fort Huachuca proceeded smoothly. The wagon was well balanced and easy to handle, the team responsive to Prudence's commands. The route took her through varied terrain, rolling grasslands giving way to more arid landscapes as she headed south. By midday, she had covered significant ground, stopping briefly to rest the horses and eat the lunch Mrs. Garvey had prepared. As Thomas had warned, the trail narrowed as it passed through a canyon in the early afternoon. Prudence slowed the team, her senses alert for any sign of danger. The revolver Thomas had given her was tucked securely at her waist, readily accessible. The canyon walls rose steeply on either side, casting the trail into shadow. Prudence found herself holding her breath as they moved through the most confined section, eyes constantly scanning the rocky outcroppings above. But no bandits appeared, and gradually the walls fell away, the trail widening once more as it emerged into open country. Fort Huachuca came into view late in the afternoon, its adobe walls and parade ground a welcome sight after the long journey. As Prudence guided the wagon through the gates, she was met with the expected surprise at seeing a woman driver. But the fort's quartermaster quickly recovered his composure and directed her where to unload the supplies. Mr. Prescott said to expect a new driver, the quartermaster, a Lieutenant Davis, remarked as he signed for the delivery. He didn't mention it would be a lady. Does that present a problem, Lieutenant? Prudence asked, her tone polite but firm. The officer smiled slightly. Not at all, Miss Foster. The Army doesn't much care who delivers our supplies, so long as they arrive intact and on schedule. He gestured toward a building across the parade ground. We've prepared quarters for you in the visitors' barracks. I'll have a private show you the way once we've unloaded. The accommodations were sparse, but clean: a small room with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a chair. After caring for her team and ensuring they were properly stabled for the night, Prudence was invited to dine with the officers in their mess. The evening proved surprisingly pleasant. Once the initial awkwardness of having a woman at their table passed, the officers treated Prudence with collegial respect, especially after learning of her background as a stagecoach driver. That route through Apache Pass is no joke, the fort commander commented. You must have seen some action. Prudence nodded, accepting a cup of coffee. My father and I had our share of adventures. The Apaches generally left the stages alone after the peace treaties, but road agents were always a concern. And yet you continued driving after your father passed, Lieutenant Davis observed. That takes courage, or stubbornness, Prudence replied with a slight smile. According to the good people of Coolidge, it makes me unwomanly, the commander snorted. Sounds like the kind of nonsense civilians worry about. Out here, we judge people by their mettle, not their sex. The conversation turned to other matters: the state of the cavalry's horses, the effectiveness of the new rifles being issued, the rumors of trouble brewing with renegade bands in the mountains to the east. Prudence listened attentively, aware that such information could be valuable on future journeys. When she retired to her quarters that night, she found herself thinking of Thomas, wondering what he would make of her day. There was something surprisingly intimate about the thought, as if she were mentally composing a letter to someone dear to her heart. The return journey the next day was as uneventful as the outbound trip had been. Prudence pushed the team a bit harder, eager to reach Willow Creek before nightfall. The horses seemed to sense her mood, maintaining a steady pace that ate up the miles. As she drove, Prudence found herself anticipating the sight of the ranch, of Thomas waiting for her return. The realization that she was looking forward to seeing him not just as her employer, but as a man whose company she enjoyed, was both thrilling and unsettling. The sun was low in the western sky when Prudence guided the wagon into the ranch yard. Thomas emerged from the main house at the sound of the wheels, his face lighting with relief and pleasure at the sight of her. "Welcome back," he called, striding toward the wagon. "How was the journey?" "Smooth as silk," Prudence reported, setting the brake and winding the reins. "Your horses are exceptional." Thomas helped her down from the seat, his hands strong and warm at her waist. He held on a moment longer than strictly necessary, his eyes scanning her face as if reassuring himself that she was indeed safely returned. "You must be tired," he said, releasing her reluctantly. "Charlie can take care of the team. Mrs. Garvey has supper waiting," but Prudence shook her head. "I'd like to tend to them myself, if you don't mind. They served me well. It's only right I see to their comfort." Thomas's expression reflected approval and something deeper. "Of course, I'll help you." Together they unharnessed the team and rubbed them down, working in companionable silence. Prudence was aware of Thomas's occasional glances, the way he seemed to be studying her with quiet intensity. "What?" she finally asked, catching him watching her brush the lead horse. "Nothing," Thomas said, then amended. "Everything. You're not what I expected, Prudence Foster." "Is that good or bad?" "Decidedly good." His voice was warm with admiration. "You're even more capable than I'd hoped, and far more intriguing." The compliment brought heat to Prudence's cheeks, but before she could respond, Mrs. Garvey appeared at the stable door, announcing that supper would be ruined if they didn't come at once. Over the meal, Prudence recounted her journey, including her evening with the fort officers. Thomas listened attentively, asking questions that showed genuine interest in her experiences. "It sounds like you made quite an impression. he remarked when she mentioned Lieutenant Davis's parting comment that he looked forward to seeing her on future deliveries. The Army is refreshingly practical, Prudence said. They care more about results than propriety. A philosophy I share, Thomas agreed, though I admit I was concerned about your safety, the canyon section especially. It was quiet as a church, Prudence assured him, though I kept my eyes open and your revolver handy. The weeks that followed fell into a pleasant rhythm. Prudence made regular deliveries to Fort Huachuca and occasionally to other Army posts, gradually expanding her routes as Thomas's beef contracts grew. Between journeys, she helped around the ranch, discovering a talent for bookkeeping that Thomas quickly put to use. Their relationship evolved as well, moving beyond employer and employee to a friendship marked by mutual respect and growing affection. Thomas began finding reasons to spend time with Prudence beyond their work, inviting her to ride the boundaries of the ranch with him, asking her opinion on breeding stock, sharing books from his personal library. For her part, Prudence found herself looking forward to these moments together, savoring Thomas's company and the conversations that ranged from practical matters to philosophical discussions. She had never known a man who valued her mind as much as Thomas seemed to, who listened to her views as if they held weight equal to his own. One evening, about 2 months after Prudence had come to Willow Creek, Thomas invited her to ride with him to a special spot on the property. They set out as the workday was ending, the setting sun painting the landscape in shades of gold and amber. "Where are we going?" Prudence asked as they rode side by side, their horses picking their way along a trail that climbed gradually into the foothills. "You'll see," Thomas replied mysteriously. "It's my favorite place on the ranch. I thought you might like it too." The trail wound upward until they reached a promontory overlooking the entire valley. From this vantage point, Willow Creek Ranch was spread before them like a living map, the main house and outbuildings, the corrals and pastures, the creek snaking its silver path through the heart of the property. "It's beautiful," Prudence breathed, reining in her horse beside Thomas's. "I found this spot the first day I saw the land," Thomas said quietly. "I stood here and knew this was where I wanted to build my life." He turned in his saddle to face her. "I've never brought anyone else up here." The significance of his words wasn't lost on Prudence. "Why me?" Thomas's eyes held her steadily. "Because when I look at this land now, I can't imagine it without you on it." Prudence's heart raced at the implication. "Thomas, I know it's only been 2 months," he continued, "but I've never been more certain of anything. You belong here, Prudence." "With the land, with the work." He took a deep breath. "With me, are you saying what I think you're saying?" Prudence asked, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. Thomas dismounted and came to her horse's side, reaching up to help her down. When she was standing before him, he took both her hands in his. "I'm saying that I love you, Prudence Foster. I've loved you since that day in the stagecoach when you knocked a bandit's arm aside to save me. Maybe even before that, when you first took the reins and showed the world what you were made of." He squeezed her hands gently. "I'm not asking for an answer today. I know this is sudden, and you might need time to consider." Prudence silenced him by rising on her toes and pressing her lips to his. The kiss was brief but charged with emotion, a declaration of her own feelings more eloquent than words. When she pulled back, Thomas looked stunned but delighted. "Does that mean?" "It means I love you too, Thomas Prescott," Prudence said, surprised by how easy it was to admit now that the moment had come. "I think I've known it for weeks, but I was afraid to acknowledge it." "Afraid? Why?" Prudence looked out over the ranch, gathering her thoughts. "All my life I've been fighting to be taken seriously, to be valued for my abilities rather than judged by my sex. With you, I found that acceptance, that respect. I feared that if I admitted my feelings, somehow that would change. That I'd become just another woman to be protected and sheltered, not a partner." Thomas cupped her cheek, turning her face gently back to his. "Prudence, I fell in love with you because of your strength, your independence, your spirit. The last thing I want is to dim that light." His eyes were sincere, his expression earnest. I don't want to shelter you, I want to stand beside you. I want us to build something together, a life, a future, a family if that's what you desire." Tears pricked at Prudence's eyes, the emotion of the moment overwhelming her customary composure. "I never thought I could have both the freedom I crave and the love I've secretly longed for." "Why not? Who says you must choose?" Thomas brushed a tear from her cheek with his thumb. "The people who called you unwomanly for driving a stagecoach. The ones who think women should be decorative and silent. They don't get to define your life, Prudence. We do." In that moment, on that hillside overlooking the ranch that had become her home, Prudence felt as if the final piece of a puzzle had fallen into place. The future stretched before her, not as a narrow path constrained by society's expectations, but as an open road full of possibilities with Thomas beside her every mile of the way. "So," Thomas said, his voice lighter now, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth, "will you marry me, Prudence Foster? Will you drive me anywhere you want for the rest of our days?" Prudence laughed, the sound pure and joyful in the evening air. "Yes, Thomas Prescott, yes to all of it." Their second kiss was longer, deeper, a sealing of promises and a taste of the passion that had been building between them. When they finally broke apart, breathless and smiling, the first stars were appearing in the darkening sky above them. "We should head back," Thomas said reluctantly. "The light's fading." As they mounted their horses for the return journey, Prudence felt lighter than she had in years. The weight of constantly proving herself, of fighting against the unwomanly label, seemed to fall away, leaving only the certainty that with Thomas, she had found not just acceptance but celebration of who she truly was. News of their engagement spread quickly throughout the ranch and, inevitably, to Coolidge. Reactions were mixed, ranging from Mrs. Garvey's delighted approval to raised eyebrows and whispered comments from some of the townspeople when Prudence and Thomas rode in together to order supplies for the ranch. "They're saying you only hired me to court me," Prudence told Thomas as they left the general store, aware of the curious glances following them. Thomas laughed, unconcerned. "Then they clearly don't know either of us very well. Anyone who's seen you drive would know I hired you for your skill. And anyone who knows you would understand you'd never be so underhanded," Prudence added, squeezing his arm gratefully. They set the wedding date for the following month, a simple ceremony to be held at Willow Creek Ranch with only their closest friends in attendance. Mrs. Holloway traveled from Coolidge to help with preparations, and to Prudence's surprise, even Lieutenant Davis and several officers from Fort Huachuca accepted their invitation. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and bright, a perfect Arizona spring day. Prudence stood in her cabin, now adorned with personal touches that had made it truly hers over the past months, and gazed at her reflection in the small mirror. Her wedding dress was simple but elegant, a cream-colored gown with lace at the collar and cuffs, ordered from a shop in Tucson. Mrs. Holloway bustled around her, making final adjustments and fussing over the flowers woven into Prudence's upswept hair. "Your father would be so proud," the older woman said, her eyes misty with emotion. "To see his daughter so happy, so settled with a good man. Do you think so?" Prudence asked softly. "He always said I was meant for the open road." "And so you are," Mrs. Holloway assured her, "but that doesn't mean you travel it alone. Thomas understands that about you. He doesn't want to cage you, he wants to journey with you." The ceremony took place beneath the spreading branches of a willow tree by the creek that gave the ranch its name. Thomas waited there, handsome in a new suit, his face lighting with wonder as Prudence walked toward him on the arm of Charlie, the ranch foreman who had offered to give her away in her father's absence. The vows they exchanged were traditional but heartfelt, each word invested with meaning and promise. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Thomas kissed Prudence with a tenderness that brought tears to more than one onlooker's eyes. The celebration afterward was joyous and informal, a feast prepared by Mrs. Garvey, music provided by several ranch hands who played fiddle and guitar, dancing that continued well into the evening. Through it all, Thomas scarcely left Prudence's side, his eyes returning to her again and again with an expression of amazed gratitude, as if he couldn't quite believe his good fortune. As night fell and the festivities continued, Thomas drew Prudence away from the gathering, leading her to a quiet spot beneath the stars. "I have a wedding gift for you," he said, producing a small wooden box from his pocket. Curious, Prudence opened it to find a delicate silver bracelet, intricately worked with a pattern of intertwined vines. "It's beautiful," she breathed as Thomas fastened it around her wrist. "There's more," he told her, his expression both nervous and excited. "Come with me." Hand in hand, they walked to the barn, where Thomas lit a lantern and led her to a stall she hadn't seen before. Inside was the most beautiful stagecoach Prudence had ever laid eyes on, smaller than the Butterfield coaches she had driven, but perfectly proportioned, gleaming with fresh paint and polished brass fittings. "Thomas," she gasped, reaching out to touch the glossy red wheel. "What is this?" "It's yours," he said simply. "I had it built in Tucson based on your descriptions of the perfect coach. It's for shorter journeys, picnics, trips to town, visits to neighbors when we have them." He squeezed her hand. "I thought perhaps someday, when we have children, you might want to show them what their mother can do." Tears sprang to Prudence's eyes at the thoughtfulness of the gift, not just the coach itself, but what it represented. Thomas wasn't asking her to set aside the part of herself that loved the freedom of driving. He was incorporating it into their future together. "Thank you," she whispered, turning to embrace him, "for understanding me so completely." Thomas held her close, his cheek against her hair. "I promise to love all of you, Prudence, not just the parts that fit neatly into what society expects." They returned to the celebration hand in hand, their faces glowing with happiness that had little to do with the lanterns strung among the trees and everything to do with the future they were building together. Later that night, in the main house that was now their shared home, Thomas and Prudence discovered the physical expression of their love, learning each other's bodies with the same care and respect with which they had come to know each other's minds and hearts. Their passion was both tender and fierce, a meeting of equals who had found in each other the perfect complement to their own strengths. The months that followed were filled with adjustments and discoveries as Prudence and Thomas settled into married life. Prudence continued to make deliveries for the ranch, but now she alternated this work with helping Thomas manage the expanding business. Her head for figures and practical approach to problems proved invaluable as they negotiated new contracts and planned improvements to the property. 6 months after their wedding, Prudence made an important discovery of her own. "Thomas," she said one evening as they sat on the veranda watching the sunset paint the sky in vivid hues, "I have news." Something in her tone made him turn to her with sudden attention. "What is it?" "I've seen Dr. Marshall in town." Prudence took his hand, placing it gently over her still flat abdomen. "We're going to have a baby." The joy that transformed Thomas's face was something Prudence knew she would remember all her days. He gathered her into his arms, laughing and crying at once, his happiness too great to be contained in any one emotion. "A baby," he repeated, wonder in his voice. "Our child." As her pregnancy progressed, Prudence reluctantly curtailed her driving duties, though Thomas never suggested she stop entirely. Instead, he accompanied her on shorter journeys, the two of them side by side on the wagon seat or in her beloved small stagecoach, planning for the future and marveling at the life growing within her. Their son, Edward Thomas Prescott, was born on a stormy night in early spring, arriving in the world with a lusty cry that made the midwife laugh. "Strong lungs on this one," the woman declared as she placed the swaddled infant in Prudence's arms. "He'll be heard just like his mama." Thomas, who had paced anxiously outside the bedroom door throughout Prudence's labor, was finally allowed in to meet his son. The expression on his face as he gazed at the tiny, perfect features of their child was one of such profound love that Prudence felt her heart might burst with happiness. "He's magnificent," Thomas whispered, gently touching the downy head, "just like his mother." Life at Willow Creek Ranch adjusted once more to accommodate its newest member. Edward called Eddie by everyone but his grandmother Garvey, who insisted on his full name, grew quickly. A sturdy, curious child with his father's dark hair and his mother's determined blue eyes. By the time he was 2, Eddie insisted on helping his mother with the horses, standing on a bucket to brush their legs with solemn concentration. By 3, he could name every animal on the ranch and recite the route to Fort Huachuca with perfect accuracy, having heard it described so often. "He's got the Foster wanderlust," Prudence told Thomas one evening, watching their son race his wooden horse across the floor of the sitting room. "And the Prescott love of the land, an interesting combination." "The best of both of us," Thomas agreed, his arm around her shoulders. "Just wait until the new one arrives. We'll have our hands full then." Prudence smiled, her hand resting on the gentle swell that announced their second child. "I can't wait." Their daughter, Clara Rose, was born in the heat of summer, a dainty counterpoint to her boisterous brother. Where Eddie was all motion and noise, Clara was watchful and thoughtful, observing the world with quiet intensity from the safety of her mother's arms. As the children grew, Willow Creek Ranch thrived under Thomas and Prudence's joint stewardship. The cattle operation expanded, and their reputation for quality and reliability spread throughout the territory. They added parcels of adjoining land, built new barns and corrals, and hired additional hands to manage the growing herd. Through it all, Prudence maintained her connection to the work she loved. Though her driving duties were necessarily reduced with the demands of motherhood, she never gave them up entirely. By the time Eddie was 5 and Clara 3, Prudence had resumed regular deliveries, sometimes with one or both children accompanying her on shorter journeys. "My mama drives better than anybody," Eddie proudly told a visiting cattle buyer one day. "They used to say it was unwomanly, but that's just silly talk." Thomas, overhearing, caught Prudence's eye across the yard and winked. "Smart boy," he commented to the buyer. "Gets his good sense from his mother." The years passed, marking their progress in the growth of their children and the expansion of their ranch. Eddie, at 10, was already showing his father's gift for understanding cattle and his mother's love of horses. Clara, at 8, revealed an unexpected talent for mathematics, helping Prudence with the account books and calculating feed requirements with uncanny accuracy. "What do you think they'll become?" Thomas asked Prudence late one night as they lay in bed, the ranch quiet around them. "Whatever they choose," Prudence answered without hesitation. "That's the gift we can give them, the freedom to find their own paths without the weight of other people's expectations." Thomas pressed a kiss to her temple. "Just as you found yours, despite what everyone said about it being unwomanly to drive a stagecoach. Just as I found you," Prudence corrected, turning in his arms to face him. "The man who said, 'Drive me anywhere you want,' and meant it, and have you?" Thomas asked, his voice tender in the darkness. "Have you driven us where you wanted to go?" Prudence thought of the journey that had brought her to this moment, from a young woman fighting for the right to follow her passion to a wife and mother who had found a way to have both love and freedom. She thought of the ranch they had built together, the children they were raising, the life they had created that honored both their individual strengths and their shared vision. "Yes," she said simply, her heart full. "This is exactly where I wanted to drive us, home." Thomas's arms tightened around her, and in the quiet of their bedroom, with the sounds of the ranch settling for the night around them, Prudence Foster Prescott knew with absolute certainty that she had found her true destination. Not the end of the road, for there would always be new horizons to explore, new challenges to face, but the place where she belonged, with the man who had seen her completely and loved all that he saw. In the years that followed, the story of the unwomanly stagecoach driver and the cowboy who had invited her to drive him anywhere became something of a legend in the territory. People would point out Prudence and Thomas at gatherings, whispering about how she had defied convention and he had defied expectations. But neither Prudence nor Thomas paid much attention to such talk. They were too busy living the life they had chosen, guiding their children toward adulthood with the same blend of freedom and responsibility that had shaped their own partnership. and finding in each day together the continuing joy of a journey shared. And sometimes, on clear evenings when the work was done and the children were settled, they would take out Prudence's small red stagecoach, harness the best team, and drive together into the sunset, following no particular route but the one that led always, inevitably, back to the home and life they had built together, a life as wide and free as the Arizona sky, and as deeply rooted as the willow trees that gave their beloved ranch its name.